Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Everything Within podcast. I'm your host, Alina Krasnožon. This podcast is all about empowering you to build an extraordinary, fulfilling life and tap into the limitless potential that resides within you. Thank you for tuning in today. In today's episode, we will talk about the invisible force that not only transformed my career, but completely changed how I approach life itself. The power of showing up when absolutely no one is watching. This isn't about crafting the perfect Instagram life or building a personal brand that impresses others. It's about something far more profound, the private, often invisible commitment you make to yourself and your vision, long before you receive external validation. For years, I was caught up in the trap of measuring my worth through external accomplishments and approval. Behind closed doors, though, I wasn't showing up for myself. I was performing for an audience, creating a carefully curated image of success, while completely neglecting the private, consistent actions that actually build a life of meaning. What I witnessed around me was equally troubling. People postponing their genuine happiness while chasing external markers of success. They'd pursue the right career, accumulate the right possessions, and cultivate the right appearance, all while neglecting to build a meaningful relationship with themselves. When they finally achieved these external goals, the fulfillment they expected never materialized. Their lives simply passed by as they waited for external accomplishments to create internal satisfaction. That was the standard handed to me, and for years I didn't question it. I remember thinking, is this really the best way to live? Is this all there is to life? And what I discovered through my own journey was both challenging and liberating. From learning playing piano and guitar, to studying English for years every single day because I wanted fluency, to creating a plan to live abroad, none of it came with instant results. I achieved all these things because I kept showing up, even though I wasn't sure whether the results would follow. I still remember the frustration of searching for a host family in France for over 6 months without any success. I could have easily given up, most people would have, but something in me refused to let go of that vision. Then came learning French from scratch to pass the university entrance exams, followed by months of job hunting and countless interviews before landing my first job there. Each step was a lesson in perseverance when no one was watching, when there was no audience to applaud, when there was no one to validate my efforts. The same pattern emerged when I started my website design business. Months of searching for those first website design clients, feeling desperate and lost, but persisting anyway. Building a life of freedom had become my obsession, too important to abandon despite the silence and lack of external validation. The most important work happens when no one is watching. It's in those private moments of showing up for yourself, when there is no applause, no validation, no metrics telling you you're on the right track, that the foundation for lasting success is built. So in today's episode, we'll talk about what it truly means to play a long game when no one is watching. We'll explore how to build resilience through consistency and find joy in the process rather than just fixating on outcomes. Because that's where the real magic happens, not in the destination, but in falling in love with the journey itself. So whether you're creating content, building a business, developing a skill, or transforming any area of your life, today's episode is about sustaining yourself when the external world isn't giving you the feedback you crave, and why that might be the most powerful thing you will ever do for yourself. Let's begin. We've all been there, searching for that magical pill, that one perfect strategy that will transform our lives or businesses overnight. But let me ask you something. When was the last time a quick fix actually fixed anything permanently in your life? We're wired for instant gratification. Our brains have been trained to chase quick dopamine and the immediate reward. We're created a world where being patient feels almost physically painful. Think about it. Most of us can't even sit alone in a room for 1 hour without reaching for our phones. Boredom has become intolerable. This mindset bleeds into everything we try. We attempt a new skill for 30 minutes and get frustrated when we are not immediately competent. We post content for a week and wonder why we're not viral. We try a new marketing strategy and abandon it when it doesn't yield immediate results. The quick fix approach doesn't just fail, it confirms our worst fears that nothing works, that I don't have what it takes, leading many to quit trying altogether. The alternative? Starting small, being playful, finding genuine enjoyment in the daily practice. When you show up consistently for something you want to master, even if it's just 15 minutes per day, you won't see results today or tomorrow, but eventually the compounding effect kicks in. Your skills develop in subtle ways, your ideas flow more naturally, and you begin to fall in love with the process itself. Your brain physically changes when you commit to showing up day after day. We've all heard those magical success stories, the app that suddenly went viral, the creator who came out of nowhere, the business that seemed to explode overnight. These narratives are seductive, but they're also incredibly damaging. What these stories almost always leave out is the years of invisible work that preceded the overnight breakthrough. But as soon as you dig deeper, you will usually find that before the big breakthrough happened, there were years of consistent effort, the countless failures, pivots, and experiments, the pain of endless hours of practice when no one was watching. Why don't we hear about this part? Because it's not particularly glamorous or shareable. Who wants to see someone waking up at 5 a.m. to work on their craft before their day job day after day for years? Who wants to watch the daily struggles, doubts, and micro adjustments? Who wants to celebrate the person who keeps going after their 10th rejection? The reality isn't neat enough for a motivational Instagram post. But understanding this truth is liberating. It means that success isn't about lightning striking. It's about positioning yourself in the storm consistently for long enough that lightning eventually finds you. When you understand this, you stop questioning why your efforts aren't yielding immediate results. You recognize that the seeming overnight success around you are simply harvesting what they've been planting for years. There is a predictable cycle, and many of you probably experienced it too. Intense motivation leads to huge effort, which hits a wall when quick results don't materialize, resulting in burnout and abandonment, only to repeat when the next burst of inspiration strikes. This burnout cycle is directly linked to our expectations and how we measure progress. When we expect quick transformations and measure ourselves exclusively through external metrics, views, followers, sales, recognition, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment before we even begin. The psychology behind it is fascinating. Studies show that extrinsic motivation, driven by external rewards, creates initial intensity but rapidly diminishes when those rewards aren't immediately forthcoming. Meanwhile, intrinsic motivation, driven by internal satisfaction and enjoyment, creates sustainable action over much longer periods of time. Sustainable growth requires a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of the steep, unsustainable climb followed by collapse, think of it as a gentle upward spiral. Some days you will feel like you're moving sideways or even backward, but the overall trajectory remains upward when you zoom out. This approach requires building recovery into the process rather than pushing until breakthrough. It means celebrating small wins rather than fixating on the ultimate goal. It means finding genuine enjoyment in the daily practice rather than tolerating it for some future payoff. It means developing alternate metrics of progress, metrics that you control, like consistency, skill development, and personal satisfaction, rather than metrics that depend on external circumstances. When you learn to validate yourself internally, everything changes. Think about the promises you make to yourself versus the commitments you make to others. Most of us would never stand up a client or a friend, yet we routinely break promises to ourselves to exercise, to eat healthy, to create, to learn, to rest. and then judge ourselves permanently for breaking those promises. When you begin honoring commitments to yourself with the same intensity you bring to external commitments, you literally rewire your brain. You build self-trust. You develop alignment between what you say and what you do. You start to keep promises to yourself. This internal alignment becomes the foundation for everything else, because the truth is, external motivation, even from the most supportive community, eventually fluctuates. There will be days when no one is watching, when no one is cheering, when no one seems to care. On those days, the only thing that will keep you going is the commitment that you've made to yourself. I found that keeping a private record of my daily practice completely separate from what I share publicly helps reinforce this internal validation. It's not about what others see, it's about knowing that you showed up, that you did the work, that you honored your commitment to your own growth. This self-validation creates resilience against the inevitable disappointments and plateaus. You develop the ability to say, I'm proud of myself for showing up today, regardless of the outcome. And paradoxically, when you can genuinely embody this mindset, the external results often begin to follow. The foundation of lasting success isn't built on external validation or viral moments. It's built on this daily practice of showing up for yourself first, regardless of who is watching. When we talk about showing up consistently when no one is watching, we can't skip the most crucial element, the inner work. I mention this in nearly every episode because it truly is the foundation of everything else. Without addressing what's happening beneath the surface, all the productivity hacks and content strategies in the world won't create lasting change. This inner work is what will sustain you when your motivation fades, when results aren't immediate, and when the path forward feels unclear. The first step in this inner work is becoming aware of what's actually holding you back. Most of us have invisible barriers that we're not even conscious of, silent saboteurs operating behind the scenes. Ask yourself, what do you actually feel like when you sit down to take action on your goals? What sensations arise in your body? What thoughts flood your mind? Are you aware of the emotional undercurrents driving your behaviors? Many people are living in a reactive state, completely unaware of their inner world. They spiral into negativity, procrastination, or perfectionism without recognizing these patterns. They blame external circumstances, not enough time, not enough resources, not enough support, without realizing that the true barriers are internal and often unconscious. But external circumstances will never be perfect. There will always be obstacles. But when you become aware of your internal landscape, you gain the power to choose your response rather than simply reacting. So I invite you to pause right now, wherever you are, and check in. What emotions are you carrying today? What thoughts keep cycling through your mind? What sensations are present in your body? This simple practice of awareness is the first step towards change. So where these invisible barriers originate? Many of our most powerful limiting beliefs were formed in childhood and early experiences. Maybe you learned that it wasn't safe to stand out. Maybe you were taught that your worth was tied to achievement or appearance. Maybe you absorbed the message that you need to be small, convenient, or pleasing to be loved and accepted. Think about your own upbringing for a moment. Was it safe to show up as your authentic self? Or did you need to mold yourself to be safe, to be loved, to be accepted? The challenging truth is that most parents and families aren't consciously trying to instill these limiting beliefs. They're simply passing down what was handed to them generation after generation. They're rarely a villain in the story, just unconscious patterns being perpetuated. But you have the ability to become aware of these inherited limitations and choose differently. You can decide that the patterns stop with you. You can reclaim your authenticity and power to dictate how you live your life. There is nobody to blame, really. When you recognize that many of your self-doubts and fears aren't actually yours, but were installed by past experiences and conditioning, you can begin the process of questioning and releasing them. You can start to look at them from the side and don't merge with them. One of the most common barriers is the paradoxical fear of both failure and success. Fear of failure is more obvious. We worry about being judged, looking foolish, or confirming our worst fear about ourselves. We imagine the sting of rejection or criticism, and it keeps us playing small. But fear of success can be equally paralyzing. Many of us have unconscious beliefs that we don't deserve success, that more visibility will bring more judgment, or that achievement will somehow change our relationships or identity in ways we're not prepared for. Both fears of failure and success serve the same function. They keep us in our comfort zone, in the familiar territory of what we know. But failing in public builds resilience like nothing else. Each time you put yourself out there and the world doesn't end, you grow stronger. And as for success, you can grow into it gradually, developing the internal capacity to hold more abundance, visibility, and impact as you go. What about perfectionism? Perfectionism has rarely something to do with high standards. It's about using those standards as a shield against vulnerability and potential criticism. I will launch when it's perfect. I will share my work when I have it all figured out. I will start when conditions are ideal. These statements sound reasonable, even admirable, but they're often disguised protection mechanisms. Your brain and body are trying to keep you safe from judgment, rejection, or failure. You're not lazy or less disciplined than others who seem to share their work effortlessly. You're simply responding to deeper patterns of self-protection. The antidote isn't pushing through with brute force, it's understanding the protective function behind perfectionism and gently challenging it. It's creating safe conditions for imperfect action. It's reframing mistakes as essential data rather than evidence of inadequacy. You can try asking why questions to transform your relationship with consistency. Here is how it works. Take any goal or habit you're struggling to maintain consistently right now. Ask yourself why it matters to you, and take that answer and ask why again. Continue this chain of questioning until you reach the core value or emotional truth. For example, why do I want to create consistent content? Because I want to grow my audience. Why do I want to grow my audience? Because I want my message to reach more people. Why do I want my message to reach more people? Because I believe it will help them overcome struggles I've faced. Why does that matter to me? Because I know how isolating those struggles can be, and I want others to feel less alone. Now we've reached something powerful, a core value of connection and diminishing suffering. This deep why will sustain you far more effectively than any external metrics or validation ever will. I encourage you to try this with your own projects and habits. Dig deep until you find the emotional core, the value-based driver behind your goals. Write it down and keep it visible when motivation disappears. One pattern I observed repeatedly in how unresolved emotional issues inevitably manifest as consistency problems. You might set the perfect schedule, have clear goals and genuine intentions, but if you have unprocessed trauma, unacknowledged needs, or unhealed parts of yourself, these will eventually sabotage your efforts. When you find yourself hitting the same wall repeatedly, procrastinating in the same way, abandoning projects at the same stage, or repeating self-sabotage behaviors, it's usually a sign that something deeper needs your attention. It's your inner wisdom signaling that something important needs processing before you can move forward authentically. When you hit a familiar wall, get curious. What might this be showing me? What needs more attention here? What am I avoiding feeling or facing? What about your internal narrative? The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we're capable of, and what's possible for us. If your internal narrative is I never finish what I start, or I'm not disciplined enough, or success isn't for people like me, these beliefs will manifest as your lived experiences. The good news is that those narratives can be rewritten. You can create stories that empower you. Start by becoming aware of your current narratives. What do you tell yourself about consistency, about your capacity for success, about what you deserve? Then begin crafting alternative narratives that align with your long-term vision while still honoring your truth. Instead of, I never finish what I start, perhaps I'm developing my capacity for completion one small project at a time. Instead of, I'm not disciplined enough, maybe I'm learning which conditions support my consistency. These new narratives create space for growth while still acknowledging where you are. They are bridges between your current reality and your desired future. Remember, the inner work isn't a one-time project, it's an ongoing practice, but it's the foundation that will support everything else we discussed today. Without it, strategies and tactics can only take you so far. With it, you create an internal conditions for sustainable success, regardless of external validation. So what motivates you at your core? What would you continue doing even if nobody ever saw it? For me, it's in the calm clarity that comes after completing a morning ritual before the world wakes up. For others, it's the quiet pride of taking that scary action when all they wanted to do is to hide. Maybe it's the liberation of finally speaking your truth in a blog post or a podcast episode, or a satisfaction of showing up for your craft day after day purely for the love of it. Your intrinsic motivation is deeply personal. It's about how the action itself makes you feel, not the reaction it generates. Take a moment now to identify one aspect of your work that brings you genuine satisfaction, regardless of outcome. That will be your anchor when external metrics disappoint. We inherited narrow definitions of success that revolve around metrics, milestones, material acquisitions. But what if success is yours to define? The most liberated creators I know have written their own success metrics. For some, success means creative freedom. For others, it means impact over income. For still others, it means sustainable joy in their daily practice. Your definition of success might include financial targets, but it shouldn't end there. What would success feel like in your body? What relationships would it nurture? What values would it honor? When you craft a personal definition of success that resonates with your deepest values, you create internal validation that can sustain you through the inevitable ups and downs of external metrics. Try this. Write your success definition as a feeling state rather than achievement. Instead of having 100,000 subscribers, perhaps it's feeling confident that my message is reaching those who need it most. The people who sustain creativity the longest don't take it the most seriously. They approach it with the most play. When we were children, we created without concern for outcome. We build sandcastles knowing the tide will wash them away. We tell stories without worrying about plot structure. We dance without wondering how we look. Somewhere along the way, many of us lost this natural state of creative play. We became concerned with results, with judgment, with getting it right. And ironically, this seriousness often diminishes our ability to sustain creative practice. Playfulness reduces the threat response in the brain, enhances cognitive flexibility, and makes consistency infinitely more sustainable. Your creative work can be both meaningful and playful. It can address serious topics while being approached with curiosity and experimentation. In fact, play often heals what seriousness cannot touch, including old wounds and perfectionist tendencies. So try to ask yourself, how can I bring more playfulness to my practice today? How would my approach change if the outcome didn't matter, just the experience itself? When the external feedback is unreliable or non-existent, you need a robust personal feedback system. The most effective personal feedback loops have three components. First, clear reflection. After completing work, take a moment to assess what went well and what you'd approach differently next time. Be specific and objective, as if reviewing someone else's work. Second, measurable progress markers. These aren't vanity metrics, but personally meaningful indicators. Maybe it's noting when you overcome resistance, tracking your consistency, or documenting skill improvements. Third, compassionate accountability. This means holding yourself to your commitments without the harsh inner critic. It's a firm but kind parent within who says, "We said we would do this, and we honor our word to ourselves." Together, these elements create a feedback system that's far more reliable and nuanced than anything external validation can provide. Here is the concrete exercise you can try to build sustainable consistency. Here is how it works. First, identify the absolute minimum action that still moves you forward towards your goal. If it's the content creation, maybe it's writing just 50 words or recording just 1 minute of audio. Make it ridiculously achievable. Second, commit to this minimum for 2 weeks without exception. No heroics, no overextending, just the minimum. Third, track completion. Not quality or outcomes, the only measure of success is whether you did it. Fourth, after 2 weeks, reflect. What made it easy or difficult to maintain this minimum? What patterns emerged? What would make it even more sustainable? And fifth, only then consider gradually expanding your practice, but always maintain the minimum as your foundation. This approach builds the neural pathways of consistency before adding the pressure of significant output. It trains your brain to associate your practice with accomplishment rather than burden. The smallest action, repeated consistently, will always outperform the grand gesture abandoned after a week. Don't underestimate the power of small actions. Day to day, they seem insignificant, almost too small to matter. A single workout, a short writing session, one more video. In isolation, these actions barely register. But these small actions accumulate over time. What seems insignificant in the moment becomes transformative when compounded. Think about bamboo. For years after planting, you see absolutely nothing happening above ground. Then suddenly it grows 90 feet in 60 days. Not because the growth suddenly accelerated, but because the plant was building a root system beneath the surface all along. Your consistency works the same way. The daily actions that seem too small to measure are building your root system, your skills, your voice, your audience, your resilience. And when the external growth finally becomes visible, it will look sudden to everyone else. But you will know the truth. It was built day after day, choice by choice. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. The daily choice to show up, even at minimal capacity, keeps you on the exponential curve upward rather than declining curve downward. The challenge is that we rarely feel 1% improvement in the moment. Your content doesn't seem 1% better today than yesterday. Your skills don't feel noticeably sharper. Your audience doesn't visibly grow overnight. But these imperceivable gains accumulated consistently over time are what separate those who achieve their vision from those who remain stuck in the cycle of starting over. Let me share a bit of my own compound journey with content creation. When I started, my voice literally shook during recordings. I cringed hearing myself speak. I was stiff on camera, overthinking every word. For almost 4 years, I showed up with no certainty that any of it mattered. I tried different formats, topics, and styles, often feel like I was starting over each time. There were months of posting to what felt like an empty room. Then there were months of not posting at all. I had deeply mixed feelings, desperately wanting growth and recognition, while at the same time terrified of being truly seen and judged. I wanted impact without vulnerability, which is of course impossible. The breakthrough didn't happen in a dramatic moment. There was no viral video of sudden fame. Instead, it happened through subtle shifts accumulated over thousands of hours of practice. My voice got stronger because I used it repeatedly despite the discomfort. My confidence grew because I faced the camera again and again. Now I can detach from outcomes and find genuine joy in the process itself. I measure success by how aligned my content feels with my values, not by metrics. But this freedom wasn't available to me at the beginning. It was earned through showing up when it was hard, when no one was watching, when the results were nowhere to be found. Most people quit before the breakthrough would have happened. After pushing through the initial enthusiasm, enduring the discomfort of slow learning, the disappointment of slow growth, they conclude it's not working. They look at their metrics, see minimal progress, and decide to cut their losses. What they don't realize is that breakthrough was potentially just around the corner. The gains from compound growth aren't linear, they're exponential. This means you often endure a long plateau before seeing the upward curve. I've quit and restarted more times than I can count across various projects. Each time I quit, I reset the compound clock. Each restart meant building momentum from zero again. The question isn't whether persistence is difficult. It absolutely is. The question is, can you be the exception? Can you be the one who continues where everyone else falls away? Can you trust the process when results aren't yet visible? This brings us to fundamental mindset shift, moving from sprinting to marathon thinking. Sprinters expend maximum energy over a short distance. They're all in, then done. This approach works for short-term projects, but fails for meaningful creative work, business building, or personal growth. Marathon runners, by contrast, focus on sustainable pace. They know when to push, when to recover, when to fuel. They expect hills and valleys. They prepare for the inevitable points where their mind tells them to quit. Adopting a marathon mindset means prioritizing recovery as a part of the process, not an interruption of it. Expecting and planning for plateau periods, celebrating consistency over intensity, finding joy in the practice itself, not just the finish line. Building identity-based habits that align with who you want to become. This shift transforms consistency from a daily battle against resistance into natural expression of who you are. You no longer need heroic willpower to show up. You show up because that's simply what you do. The compound effect is about who you become through the process of showing up day after day. That transformation is the true breakthrough, and it happens regardless of whether anyone is watching. Let's talk about how to build a content strategy that is actually sustainable for a long-term game. One that helps you keep showing up consistently, especially when no one is watching. Many creators approach content with sprint mentality, pouring everything into short-term growth tactics until they inevitably burn out. Then they wonder why they can't sustain consistency. A sustainable strategy acknowledges your full humanity, your energy levels, your creative cycles, your need for rest, and what you genuinely enjoy creating. One of the biggest strategic mistakes I see creators make is focusing exclusively on short-term content like TikToks, Reels, Stories that disappear in the algorithm within days. While these formats can build awareness quickly, they create a hamster wheel effect. You're constantly starting from zero with nothing accumulated over time. The sustainable approach is balancing these short-term pieces with long-term content assets. Pieces that continue working for you months and years after publication. For me, this long-term foundation was initially blogging, but I discovered over time that writing wasn't my natural medium. I pivoted to podcasting, which I absolutely love. It gives me freedom to explore topics deeply without constraints that made writing feel like a chore. Your long-term content, whether it's YouTube videos, blog posts, or podcast episodes, become your body of work. It's searchable, likable, and continues providing value long after publication. Even without a website, platforms like YouTube, Spotify, or Medium create this permanence. The ideal ratio varies for everyone, but consider aiming for at least 30% of your content creation energy going towards these enduring assets. They are what will sustain you when algorithm changes inevitably. Here is why niching down too quickly can become a creativity killer. It boxes you in before you fully explored your authentic voice and interests. Instead of forcing yourself into a narrow niche from the beginning, consider building content pillars that can grow and evolve as you do. These are broad themes that connect you to your core values and interests, but give you room to expand and pivot. For example, rather than niching down to productivity tips for creative entrepreneurs, you might have broader pillars like mindful productivity, creative expression, or sustainable business. Themes that connect to your values but allow for evolution. This approach is why building a personal brand ultimately provides more freedom than a niche brand. When your content is anchored to your personality and values rather than a specific topic, your audience follows you for your perspective, not just your subject matter. As you naturally evolve as a person, which is healthy and inevitable, your content can evolve too. Your core values remain consistent even as your specific interest and focus areas expand. One of the most important choices you will make is selecting the right medium for your long-term content. This isn't about what's trending, it's about what aligns with your natural strength and lifestyle. Consider these factors when choosing between podcasting, video, or writing. First, your natural communication style. Do you express yourself best through conversation, visual demonstration, written exploration? The medium where you feel most natural will be the one you're most likely to sustain. Second, your lifestyle compatibility. Video production might require more dedicated space and equipment. Podcasting needs good audio quality but can be flexible. Writing can happen anywhere but demands focused attention. Third, your audience preferences. How does your ideal audience prefer to consume content? Meet them where they are, but not at the expense of your natural strength. Remember, simplicity is everything when building consistency. If your content process is so complex that it requires days of production and editing, you're creating fiction that will eventually derail your consistency. Start simple and then add complexity only as your systems solidify. Schedules tell you when to create, but systems show you how to create consistently regardless of circumstances. A schedule says create content every Tuesday at 10 a.m. A system says when these three conditions are met, content creation happens. When these elements are in place, consistent creation becomes much more sustainable than relying on willpower or rigid schedules. Your system adapts when your life gets messy. Now let's talk about something that every creator faces but few discuss openly: the valleys. Those periods where growth seems stalled, engagement drops, and motivation wanes. These plateaus are inevitable. The difference between those who ultimately succeeded and those who don't isn't whether they experience these valleys. It's how they navigate through them while continuing to show up. Understanding that plateaus are normal, actually necessary. They're not just sign of failure, they are opportunities to deepening your commitment and refining your approach. Your first 100 pieces of content are essentially your drafts. They are where you learn, experiment, and discover your authentic voice. In those first 100 videos, blog posts, or podcast episodes, you might see minimal engagement. This is normal. You're building skills, refining your message, and finding what truly lights you up. Among those 100 pieces, maybe only one will perform really well, but you need to create the other 99 to get to that one breakthrough piece. And that single piece can transform your business and life. When I look back at my early content, I see someone learning in public, someone developing their voice. The quality and the confidence weren't there, but the commitments were, and that's what mattered. Prepare for those low engagement periods by setting realistic expectations from the beginning, focusing on skill development metrics rather than audience metrics, maintaining a consistent but sustainable pace, finding peers at similar stage for mutual support, documenting your progress to see how far you've come. One of the most challenging balances to strike is detaching from outcomes without losing your passion for the work itself. When you care deeply about your message, it's natural to want it to reach people. But when the desire becomes an attachment to specific outcomes, it creates suffering. The sustainable approach is caring deeply about the quality of what you create while releasing your grip on how it's received. This isn't indifference, it's healthy detachment. This is why falling in love with the process is so vital. When you genuinely enjoy the act of creation, the writing, recording, editing, thinking, you have an internal reward system that sustains you regardless of external metrics. Ask yourself, what parts of my creative process do I genuinely enjoy? How can I amplify these aspects? What parts feel like unnecessary friction that I could simplify or eliminate? When you structure your content creation around the elements you naturally enjoy, consistency becomes less about discipline and more about following your natural inclinations. You're no longer forcing yourself to show up, you're drawn to the work itself and simply want to show up. There is a powerful shift that happens when you prioritize process over results. Results are largely outside your control. Algorithms change, trends shift, and audience preferences evolve, but your process is entirely within your control. A process focus builds resilience against the inevitable fluctuation in results. When a piece of content underperforms, you can investigate what to improve in your process rather than questioning your entire path. The metrics, views, likes, comments, shares, they matter. But when metrics becomes your source of validation, proof of your worth or talent, they create an emotional roller coaster that is unsustainable. When you view the same metrics as neutral feedback, data that helps you understand what resonates, they become invaluable tools for refinement. This shift in perspective changes everything. Low engagement isn't a rejection, it's information. High engagement isn't validation, it's also information. So what can this data teach you? What resonated? What missed the mark? How can you apply these insights to your future content? This approach depersonalizes the metrics. They are no longer reflections of your worth, but simply signposts guiding your next steps. Here is a perspective shift that transformed my approach. Focus on building a community rather than an audience. An audience consumes, a community connects. An audience is measured by size, a community is measured by depth. An audience follows you, a community follows each other. When you reach 100 people who truly resonate with your message, who see themselves in your story and find genuine value in your perspective, you've succeeded, even if those numbers seemed small compared to viral creators. 100 people who are truly your people will create more meaningful impact and sustainable growth than 100,000 who aren't aligned with your values and message. When you build with community in mind, the valleys become less isolating. You have people who value your voice, even when the algorithms don't boost it. You get to decide how you measure your progress. You have the power to create internal metrics that actually reflect what matters to you. The internal metrics measure what's within your control and what truly contributes to your long-term vision. Consider tracking, consistency, moments of creative breakthrough, instances when you pushed beyond comfort zones, times you expanded an authentic truth, skills mastered or improved. When you shift your attention to these metrics, you create a feedback system that rewards what actually matters: growth, authenticity, and sustainable practice. One of the most overlooked aspects of the creator journey is the remarkable skill development that happens through consistent practice. While you're focused on growing an audience, you're simultaneously growing an impressive set of capabilities. Start documenting your skill progression. Create a simple log where you note improvements in specific areas of your craft. For instance, if you're a podcaster, you might track your interviewing techniques, vocal delivery, or editing efficiency. This documentation serves two powerful purposes. First, it provides concrete evidence of progress when external metrics plateau. Second, it reveals the transferable skills you're developing and have value far beyond content creation itself. I was stunned when I look back at my early content and compared it to my current work. The growth wasn't just in audience size, it was in confidence, clarity, technical skills, and creative expression. Those improvements happened so gradually that I hadn't noticed them without deliberately looking back. When you track skill development, you recognize that even during periods of seemingly stagnant growth, you're building valuable assets that no algorithm can change or take away. Finally, let's talk about celebration, one of the most overlooked elements of sustainable creation. In our rush to the next goal, we rarely pause to acknowledge how far we've come. The key is making this celebration meaningful and aligned with your values. Don't just check boxes, create a moment that reinforces why this journey matters to you. When you celebrate what truly matters to you, you reinforce your internal validation system. The long game isn't just a strategy, it's a lifestyle choice. It's a fundamental decision about how you want to live and create. It's choosing depth over shortcuts. It's valuing the journey as much as the destination. It's building something that lasts rather than chasing what sparkles momentarily. When you commit to the long game, you're making a profound statement about your values. You're saying that you believe in the power of small, consistent actions. You're acknowledging that meaningful growth takes time. You're choosing to trust the process, even when the results aren't immediately visible. There is something incredibly liberating about this choice. When you stop expecting overnight success, you release yourself from the tyranny of constant disappointment. You fall in love with the process itself. You find joy in the daily practice regardless of external validation. When you measure progress by your own meaningful metrics, you reclaim your power from algorithms and platforms. I know this path isn't easy. There will be days when you question everything, your direction, your ability, your purpose. There will be moments when it seems like no one is listening, when the growth feels painfully slow, where others who took shortcuts seem to leap ahead. But remember, those who appear to achieve overnight success have usually been showing up consistently for years when no one was watching. Those viral moments are built on a foundation of countless hours of invisible work. When you make the daily choice to honor your commitment to yourself, to create, to learn, to grow, to share, you build self-trust. You develop an unshakable inner foundation. You connect with the pure joy of expression that likely drew you to this path in the first place. This isn't selfish. It's actually the most generous approach you can take, because when you show up primarily for external validation, your content becomes shaped by what gets likes, what triggers algorithms, what others expect. But when you show up for yourself first, you create from a place of authenticity, and paradoxically, this is what ultimately resonates most deeply with others. The people who are meant to find your work will find it. Maybe not on your timeline, maybe not in the numbers you initially imagined, but they will find it. And when they do, they will connect with something real, something that couldn't have existed if you were creating primarily for the validation. I invite you to embrace the long game, not as a marketing strategy, but as a way of being. Trust that your consistent effort are building something meaningful, even when, especially when, no one is watching. Remember that the most powerful work often happens in those quiet moments of showing up for yourself. Remember that your worth isn't measured in metrics, but in the courage to keep creating authentically. The long game isn't always an easier choice, but it's the one that leads to sustainable success, genuine fulfillment, and work that truly matters. It's the path that allows your voice to develop naturally, your skills to deepen organically, and your impact to expand authentically. So keep showing up even when the path seems unclear. Keep creating even when the validation is scarce. Keep honoring your commitment to yourself, knowing that this is building a foundation that no algorithm can change, no market shift, no trend can take. You're playing the long game. And that's not just a strategy for content creation, it's a philosophy for a well-lived life. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Until the next time. Bye.